Well, they'd never heard of Barry Sanders. They said, we have a tough enough time with Thurman, but you won't ever touch this kid.
When people think of Oklahoma State football, one of the first names that comes to mind is Barry Sanders. The legendary Cowboys running back had one of the finest college football seasons in the long history of the sport. And while Sanders is undoubtedly the greatest Pokes running back, he belongs to a long lineage of Oklahoma State rushing stars. Two-time All-American Bob Fenimore was the first true star running back at Oklahoma State, giving the team its only very questionable national title in 1945. Following in his footsteps, but never quite passing him, were several solid backs. Dwayne Wood ran for over 1,000 yards from 1956 to 58. Jim Wiggins put up 1,174 yards and 16 TDs as Wood's backfield mate during those 3 seasons. Jim Dillard stepped in 1959 and put up 3 solid seasons, totaling 1,840 yards, before being drafted by the Raiders in 1962. Walt Garrison led the Big 8 in carries in 64 and 65, racking up 2,041 yards, and then winning a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. He was also a Pro Bowl selection in 1972, playing in the game despite tearing up his face a few days earlier in a steer wrestling accident. Jack Reynolds came behind him, posting 1,476 yards from 66 to 68. Bobby Cole was next up, 1,506 yards in 3 years from 69 to 71. Brent Blackman sort of played quarterback from 71 to 73, but he mostly ran the football, putting up 1,870 yards and 16 TDs, and easily eclipsed his numbers as a passer in both categories. He played alongside George Palmer, who ran for 2,110 yards and 14 touchdowns from 72 to 74. And all of those guys were solid football players, but none of them dominated on the field quite like Fenimore, at least not consistently. However, Palmer's fellow backfield mate in 1974 finally made a run at Fenimore's crown. From 1974 to 1977, Terry Miller ran for 4,582 yards and 46 TDs, posting back-to-back seasons of 1,500-plus yards to end his career. He finished 4th in Heisman voting in 1976 and 2nd in 1977, also picking up an All-American nod that season. When Miller left for the NFL, the Bills picked him 5th overall in the 78 draft. After a solid rookie season, Miller suffered a toe injury and tried to rush back, which just led to more injuries. Much like Fenimore, who only played in 10 NFL games after the Bears picked him 1st overall, thanks to a nasty collegiate knee injury, Miller was out of the NFL before he really got started. In 1979, 2 years after Terry Miller had graduated, Oklahoma State was coming off of a 3-8 season and a coaching scandal that ended with Jim Stanley stepping down. The university was looking for a spark, and they found just that in head coach Jimmy Johnson. Now, it's important to note that Johnson wasn't an offensive coach by trade. He'd played defensive line for Arkansas, helping lead the Razorbacks to a national title in 1964. The next year, he joined Louisiana Tech, where he instantly made an impact by convincing Terry Bradshaw to join the program. Bradshaw quickly took over from quarterback Phil Robertson, who you might know from Duck Dynasty, and quickly became a star. Johnson was doing the same as a coach. He only spent 1 season at La Tech before moving to several schools, ending up at Oklahoma as a defensive line coach in 1970. 3 years later, Johnson had impressed enough to take over as the defensive coordinator at his alma mater, coaching up future pros like Bryson Manor and Dirt Winston. He was hoping to earn the Razorbacks head coaching job when Frank Boyles retired, but Lou Holtz was chosen instead, and Johnson left the team to join Pitt's staff under Jackie Sherrill. He met Dave Wanstedt during his time with the team, who would go on to become one of his most trusted assistants. So when Johnson landed in Stillwater, no one would have predicted that he'd help usher in one of the strongest offensive eras in school history, but you have to remember that Johnson had been coaching at a high level for several years and knew how to find assistants. Wanstedt is the obvious name. He followed Johnson from Pitt to coach the defensive line. Tony Wise did the same, coaching the offensive line. Bob Leahy, who briefly played quarterback with the Steelers before spending 3 decades as an assistant, was the offensive coordinator. Future head coach for the Miami Hurricanes, Cleveland Browns, North Carolina Tar Heels, and FIU Butch Davis was coaching wide receivers and tight ends. And, maybe most importantly, a guy named Pat Jones was on the staff as an assistant. Oh, and just to keep it fun, future Arkansas and Ole Miss head coach Houston Nutt played quarterback for the team that first year. Of course, Nutt didn't play much, as senior Harold Bailey was entrenched as a starter. The Pokes returned a single All-Big 8 player, linebacker John Corker, who had won Big 8 Defensive Player of the Year in '78, but tore up his knee late into the season. That doesn't mean Johnson's first team didn't have talent. Running back Worley Taylor was coming off of an 800-yard season, and lineman Reggie Richardson had all the makings of a stalwart. Plus, linebacker Ricky Young and defensive end Rick Antle were ready to be unleashed alongside Corker on the defense. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnson's Cowboys weren't world beaters in 1979, but they did improve to 7-4 after going 3-8 in '78. And for what it's worth, all 4 losses would be what the March Madness Selection Committee would consider good losses. After starting the season 2-0, the Pokes lost 27-7 to number 15 ranked Arkansas at War Memorial Stadium. It was a beatdown to be sure, but not an unexpected one. The next week, Oklahoma State went on the road to Williams-Brice Stadium and lost to South Carolina 23-16. But on the other hand, they put up nearly 300 yards on a team that had the 9th best defense in the country to that point. Then, Johnson's men pulled off their big upset of the season on the road against 15th ranked Missouri. Harold Bailey went out of the game with a stomach injury, and John Dorner stepped in to help wipe out a 13-0 deficit and win the game 14-13 with 2 big touchdown passes. Unfortunately, they couldn't repeat the feat at home against their next 2 ranked foes, losing to 3rd-ranked Nebraska and 7th-ranked Oklahoma, scoring just 7 points across the 2 games. At season's end, Johnson picked up some hardware of his own, winning the Big 8 Coach of the Year for the quick turnaround. Things were looking up. Johnson's Pokes weren't at the top of the league, but they were firmly in the middle of the Big 8. Unfortunately, all of that progress went out the window in 1980. Dorner was one of 3 ineffective quarterbacks that Johnson trotted out at different points. Now, to be fair to Dorner, he broke his leg in the second game of the season, so it wasn't completely his fault. The same can't really be said for Jim Traber, who threw 10 interceptions to 3 touchdowns, including 3 picks in the season finale against the Sooners. Thankfully for Traber, who was also on Oklahoma State's baseball team, he left the football squad after the season and had a decent MLB career before becoming my dad's favorite talk show host in Oklahoma. The Pokes' best stretch came when Houston Nutt was in the lineup, but like Dorner, he struggled to stay on the field. As mentioned, the 3-7-1 season ended with a 63-14 loss against Oklahoma and freshman halfback Buster Rhymes. After the game, Johnson quipped, "I'd like to have some of Oklahoma's 3rd and 4th stringers on my team. We've got to go out and recruit some football players." That was especially true on defense, where the Pokes were losing ends Dexter Manley and Dean Prater to the draft. Manley won 2 Super Bowls with Washington and made the All-Pro team in '86 and '87. Pundits picked the Cowboys to finish near the bottom of the Big 8 in 1981, but Johnson still had Ricky Young at linebacker and a few promising young players who had impressed the previous season in defensive back Pete DiClemente and defensive tackle Gary Lewis. Plus, Dorner was healthy, and running backs Sean Jones and Ernest Anderson flashed during spring practices. It wasn't enough to expect much, but there was some potential for the Pokes. Things started well, winning with a late field goal to open the season against Tulsa. And while the Pokes faithful left the San Diego games frustrated after Jones was tackled inches short of gaining a first down late in the game, Oklahoma State picked up back-to-back road wins against North Texas and Kansas. The defense let the team down the next week in Colorado as the Buffs' reserve quarterback marched down the field with 90 seconds to go to pull off an 11-10 stunner. They recovered to pick up wins over Louisville and Missouri before 11th-ranked Nebraska came to Lewis Field on November 7th. To that point, the Pokes D had spent the year playing well, but Huskers quarterback Turner Gill dismantled them, rolling to a 54-7 win. They got back on track with wins over Kansas State and Iowa State before losing to Oklahoma 27-3 to end the regular season. The squad many had picked to finish last in the Big 8 posted a 7-4 record and finished 4th in the conference. That earned the Cowboys an Independence Bowl matchup with Texas A&M. Ernest Anderson kicked things off at the big game with a long touchdown run. That was followed by a Pokes field goal to put Oklahoma State up 10-0. From there, the game was pretty much all Aggies, who won 33-16, largely on the arm of future NFL head coach Gary Kubiak. Despite the loss, things again appeared to be heading in the right direction for Johnson and his team. In 1982, Oklahoma State returned 11 offensive starters and 8 on defense. One of them was 5'9" Ernest Anderson. He'd run for nearly 700 yards the previous season and looked primed for a great follow-up campaign. Johnson also brought in a top 25 recruiting class, which included defensive tackle Leslie O'Neal. Sure, they had lost All-American Ricky Young to the NFL, but there was a chance they could replace his talent. Anderson took his first carry of the year to the house, ripping off a 74-yard touchdown run to start the fireworks against North Texas State. The diminutive back racked up 220 yards to beat the Eagles 27-6, despite the offense turning the ball over 7 times. Unfortunately, he was stuffed at the goal line several times the next week, helping Tulsa hold on to a 25-15 upset win. The bad times continued against Louisville. Anderson ran for nearly 200 yards, but the Pokes just couldn't find the end zone, and field goals don't beat touchdowns, so Oklahoma State lost 28-22 on the road. They followed that up with back-to-back ties, and that's despite Anderson running for nearly 500 yards between the two games, giving him 4 200-yard games in the team's first 5 contests to start the season. Pokes quarterbacks Ike Jackson and Adam Hines just couldn't keep it together, and the defense, which had been so strong the year prior, struggled to contain the pass. OU dumped the Pokes the next week, largely on the legs of freshman Marcus Dupree's 2 touchdowns, though credit must go to the Sooners' defense. Anderson was averaging 208 yards per game heading into the OU matchup. He ran for 59. The Pokes finished out the season 3-2, earning wins over Missouri, Kansas State, and Iowa State, but losing to 6th-ranked Nebraska and San Diego State. That left them at 4-5-2 with a 3-2-2 conference record. Anderson led the nation with 1,877 yards, but only managed 8 touchdowns. It was a disappointing season, and those 2 ties left most wondering about what could have been. Plus, All-American defensive lineman Gary Lewis was off to the NFL. That said, Anderson was coming back for his senior season. They were also getting Sean Jones back in the lineup, and all 3 quarterbacks were returning, giving Johnson plenty of options. Plus, the ball coach had an ace up his sleeve. Ahead of the 1983 season, Johnson brought in Larry Coker to run the offense. Coker had spent the last 3 years at Tulsa, helping lead a dominant Missouri Valley offense to 3 straight conference titles. The Pokes rolled to 4 straight wins to start the season, and they did all that while 1982 All-American Ernest Anderson sat with a groin injury he picked up in the season opener. Sean Jones did a great job filling in, rushing for over 200 yards against Texas A&M, and generally being a solid back. Plus, defensive lineman Leslie O'Neal and the rest of the defense were wreaking havoc. In Game 5, they were put to the test against number 1 ranked Nebraska, which was averaging 50 points a game to that point. O'Neal and the boys held the Huskers to 14 points at Lewis Field, but the offense could only muster 10, leading to the first loss of the season. The next week, Oklahoma State built up a 20-3 lead over 15th-ranked OU heading into the 4th quarter. However, OU quarterback Danny Bradley threw a 73-yard swing pass to Derek Shepard, and OU recovered an onside kick after a successful 2-point conversion. Then, Tim Lashar drilled a 46-yard field goal with 1:14 on the clock to edge the Cowboys 21-20. Anderson was finally in the lineup the next week against Kansas and ran for 131 yards to lead the team to victory. They picked up a win at Colorado before dropping 2 straight against Kansas State and Missouri. Both games were tight, but were doomed by missed field goals and untimely drops. That said, the Cowboys finished the regular season with a win over Iowa State to secure a Blue Bonnet Bowl bid against 20th ranked Baylor. Oklahoma State quarterback Rusty Hilger tossed 2 first-half touchdowns before being knocked out just before halftime. Thankfully for the Pokes, those 2 scores and a third from Ernest Anderson secured a 24-14 victory and an 8-4 record on the season. Hilger was coming back for another year. Leslie O'Neal, who had just picked up a first-team All-Big 8 nomination, was entering his redshirt sophomore season. Sean Jones was also coming back for his senior season. Oh, and the Pokes had recruited a guy named Thurman Thomas. I've said things looked good for the Pokes a few times during Johnson's tenure, but this time, I really mean it. However, they did not look good enough for Jimmy Johnson. First, he interviewed at his alma mater, but Arkansas went with Ken Hatfield. Johnson was soon offered the Miami job, and after his friend and former OU defensive coordinator Larry Lacewell told him he needed to leave Stillwater to win a title and make it to the NFL, Johnson decided to head to Coral Gables. And while it's easy to get mad at him for leaving, Lacewell did turn out to be correct. Johnson won a title with the Canes in 1987 and 2 Super Bowls with the Dallas Cowboys in 92 and 93. Fortunately, the Pokes already had the coach of the future in the building. Pat Jones moved from the assistant bench to the head coach role. Importantly, Larry Coker stuck with the program, giving Jones stability on offense. He also brought in Houston Nutt to coach quarterbacks and wide receivers. It wasn't going to be easy though. The Pokes were starting the season on the road against 12th ranked Arizona State. And in the heat of Tempe, Arizona, against stud running back Darryl Clack, the Cowboys, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, Oklahoma State won 45-3. Third-string running back Charles Crawford ran for 137 yards, and the Cowboys picked off Jeff Van Raphorst 4 times. Oklahoma State raced out to a 4-0 start, thanks in large part to an opportunistic defense led by guys like Leslie O'Neal, Rod Brown, Mark Moore, and Adam Hines, who had converted from quarterback to DB the year prior. On the season, the secondary racked up 21 picks, and 8 of those came in the first 2 games. The 2-headed beast of Thurman Thomas and Sean Jones was also clicking, and Rusty Hilger was managing the game well at quarterback. In Week 5, the Pokes were the 9th-ranked team in the country and on the road to Lincoln. They could not pull off the upset, losing 17-3. Hilger played well, but Thomas and Jones were both limited, so Crawford took the bulk of the carries. Thankfully, Oklahoma State didn't let it affect them much and rolled off 5 straight wins. That only left the season finale against who else? The Oklahoma Sooners. Heading into the game, Oklahoma State was ranked 3rd overall in the country and OU sat at 2nd. The Pokes went into Norman with an upset on their minds. It was 7-7 at halftime, and the Cowboys took the lead 14-7 on the 3rd play of the second half. Then, the Sooners came roaring back. Oklahoma State could not move the ball on the ground, but was slinging it through the air. Still, Hilger could not overcome 2 untimely second-half turnovers, and OU capitalized, picking up a 24-14 win. Despite the loss, the Cowboys had earned a bid in the Gator Bowl against 7th-ranked South Carolina. The Gamecocks were 10-1 heading into the game, with wins over Florida State, Georgia, and Notre Dame. Oklahoma State got things started early with a 1-yard touchdown run by Thurman Thomas in the first. Thomas then threw a 6-yard touchdown pass to Rusty Hilger to take a 13-0 lead into halftime. The Gamecocks roared back in the third quarter with 2 touchdown passes, one from Quentin Lewis and the other from Mike Hold. South Carolina was up 14-13 late in the fourth, when Hilger tossed a 25-yard pass to Barry Hanna to put Oklahoma State up with just 1:04 left on the clock and secure the win. The Cowboys had lost Jimmy Johnson, but Pat Jones had just secured the first 10-win season in the school's history. All-American defensive back Rod Brown and solid quarterback Rusty Hilger might be leaving, but they still had one current All-American in defensive lineman Leslie O'Neal, and 2 guys who looked primed to reach that status in running back Thurman Thomas and safety Mark Moore. Plus, Jones's recruiting class included star wide receiver and USA Today Offensive Player of the Year Dykes and All-USA defensive back Melvin Gilliam. Expectations were high, and Oklahoma State appropriately started the year ranked 16th in the nation. They opened the season on the road against 12th ranked Washington. Thomas toted the rock 40 times for 237 yards, and Mark Moore took an interception back to the house to pull off a 31-17 upset. However, sophomore quarterback Ronnie Williams went down with an injury and missed the North Texas game. Thanks to Thomas's 191 yards, the Pokes, now ranked 8th in the nation, were able to hold off the upset-minded Eagles and squeak out a 10-9 win despite poor play from backup QB Rusty Rankin. Rankin tossed 2 picks against Miami of Ohio, but showed enough poise to quiet concerns in the 45-10 win. Plus, Thomas ran for 3 scores and returned a punt 58 yards for another touchdown. The next week, Thomas was knocked out at halftime against Tulsa. The Pokes were down 13-12 to start the second quarter, but Leslie O'Neal and Mark Moore led a second-half shutout, and Ronnie Williams made his big return to win 25-13. Oklahoma State was up to 5th in the national rankings, and 9th-ranked Nebraska was coming to Lewis Field. Oklahoma State got close, thanks to a solid showing from Williams, who threw for 363 yards and 2 scores, but a few poor throws led to interceptions and easy scores for the Huskers, who won 34-24. Oklahoma State rolled off 4 straight wins after that, with 3 of them coming in tight contests on the road, setting up a matchup with Iowa State on November 23rd. The Pokes were back up to 7th in the polls, but the Cyclones' defense was up to the task. Thomas, who was averaging 155 yards a game, was held to 54 yards on 21 carries. Williams threw for 206 yards, but was intercepted 3 times. The Pokes fell 15-10 on a blustery afternoon, dropping them to 17th in the polls, and the season finale in Stillwater against 3rd-ranked OU was looming. The two teams had to endure a sleet storm on game day, making offense nearly impossible. Thomas ran for 100 yards, but the rest of the offense mustered just 31. Meanwhile, the Sooners racked up 243, though that was a far cry from their usual 350 yards rushing. Still, OU's defense clamped the Pokes, and the Sooners walked out of Stillwater with a 13-0 win and a spot in the Orange Bowl. Oklahoma State secured a Gator Bowl bid against Bobby Bowden and the Florida State Seminoles. Despite missing his top 3 receivers, Noles freshman quarterback Chip Ferguson threw for 338 yards, and running back Tony Smith added 201 on the ground. The Pokes tried to rally in the second half, but it was too little, too late, and the Cowboys ended the season with a 34-23 loss. Thomas, O'Neal, and Moore were all named All-Americans. The Chargers picked O'Neal 8th overall in that year's draft, and he won Defensive Rookie of the Year in 1986. He made 3 All-Pro teams and 6 Pro Bowls across his 13-year career, racking up 132.5 sacks. Meanwhile, the other 2 were coming back for another year, and Dykes, who had his first career touchdown in the Gator Bowl, would hopefully give the Pokes a dynamic new player on offense. Plus, the new recruiting class included a few promising youngsters, Mike Gundy and Barry Sanders. The Pokes were young and unranked to start the season. That youth showed in the first game, as Oklahoma State needed a late flurry of touchdowns to overcome the Ragin' Cajuns of southwestern Louisiana. Quarterback Ronnie Williams struggled throughout the game, but redeemed himself with a game-winning touchdown to Dykes with just 8 seconds left on the clock. Unfortunately, the Pokes couldn't do the same against Tulsa the next week. Williams and Thomas led the team to 13 fourth-quarter points to make it close, but the Cowboys turned the ball over 4 times and couldn't overcome. Williams was even worse the next week against Houston, and Pat Jones benched the junior signal caller in favor of freshman Mike Gundy. Gundy was solid, throwing for 163 yards and a score, but the Pokes couldn't overcome the deficit, losing 28-12. Gundy and Barry Sanders got the team back on track against Illinois State. Sanders ran for 132 yards, and Gundy tossed for 121, while Jerry Deckard took an interception back 82 yards to secure a relatively easy 23-7 win over a D1 AA squad. Things would quickly turn the other way, as the next 2 matchups were road games against 3rd-ranked Nebraska and 5th-ranked Oklahoma. Unsurprisingly, the Huskers held Thomas to under 100 yards, stifling the offense en route to a 30-10 win. OU, the defending national champions, seemed poised for an easy win, but Jones's defense stood firm, not allowing an offensive touchdown. Still, Sooners kicker Tim Lashar kicked 4 field goals, and the Sooners defense held the Pokes' young offense to just 157 yards to win a surprisingly tight 19-0 contest. Thomas, who had been nursing an injury and poor play, had his first 100-yard game of the season against Kansas, helping spur the Cowboys to a 24-6 homecoming win. Gundy added 2 touchdowns, one with his feet and another on a 16-yard pass to Dykes, to show that the offense was slowly improving. They held a 14-3 lead over Colorado heading into halftime the next week, but the Buffs reeled off 4 second-half scores to storm back and win 31-14. Gundy and Dykes really started to heat up over the last 3 games of the season. Oklahoma State won all 3, with Gundy throwing for 5 touchdowns, 3 of them to Dykes. Barry Sanders also showed off his potential once again, rushing for 86 yards and a score against Missouri in the season finale to secure a 10-6 win. Thomas and Moore were again All-Americans, though injuries limited the running back to just 741 yards and 4 TDs. The Seahawks picked the hard-hitting safety in the 4th round of that year's draft, but he wasn't able to replicate his collegiate success. As for the Cowboys, the disappointing 6-5 season stung, but Thomas was back for one last season, and Gundy and Sanders were rising sophomores. Oh, and we can't forget Hartley Dykes. If nothing else, the '87 team was going to make waves on offense. Sanders started the season with a bang, taking the opening kickoff back 100 yards for a score. Thomas added 164 yards and 3 scores on the ground, while Gundy passed for 193 yards, 100 of which went to Dykes. Offensively, it was exactly what fans were hoping for. Defensively, the Pokes gave up nearly 600 yards, but Oklahoma State still pulled out a 39-28 win over Tulsa. And unfortunately, those defensive woes would come and go throughout the season. In Week 2, the Pokes blasted Houston 35-0 behind 111 yards from Thomas, a 68-yard punt return touchdown by Sanders, and Rod Smith's first defensive touchdown of the season. In a battle of the Cowboys, Oklahoma State came out on top over Wyoming, with Thomas rumbling for 193 yards and 1 score. Rod Smith had another huge game, totaling 3 turnovers, and Gundy threw for 324 yards, with Dykes picking up 154 yards and a score. Wyoming made it look close with a few late-game scores, but the Pokes triumphed 35-29. Gundy, Thomas, and Dykes continued to dominate over the next 2 weeks, and Sanders wasn't bad either in limited touches. The Cowboys beat down Southwestern Louisiana and Colorado to earn the 12th slot in the polls, heading into a home matchup against number 2 ranked Nebraska. The Huskers absolutely dismantled the Pokes. Thomas ran for just 7 yards. Sanders was more successful with 60, and Gundy threw for 221 yards, with 113 of those going to Dykes, but the Pokes didn't score a single point, losing 35-0. Oklahoma State got back on track with back-to-back wins against Missouri and Kansas State, before heading into Norman to take on the number 1 ranked Sooners. The Sooners won the day, thanks in large part to 4 interceptions by Gundy, but they paid a price. Starting quarterback Jameel Holloway hurt his knee after a weird step on the artificial turf. Fullback Lydell Carr was hurt on the second play of the game. Both guys were out for the season. And despite the loss, there were some bright spots for the Pokes. Thomas ran for 173 yards, and the defense forced 5 turnovers. It's also worth noting that OU head coach Barry Switzer was so scared of Barry Sanders that he reportedly told his team to make sure to not injure Thomas, as he didn't want Sanders on the field any more than necessary. No matter how you slice it, it wasn't enough, and OU was on top once again, 29-10. Oklahoma State finished the regular season with big wins over Kansas and Iowa State. In the final game, Thomas ran for a then school record 293 yards. That helped him overtake Terry Miller as Oklahoma State's all-time leading rusher for his career. Meanwhile, Gundy broke the Cowboys record for passing yards and completions with 2,106 and 179 respectively. And Dykes' 978 yards broke Herman Eben's previous record for pass catchers. That set up a Sun Bowl matchup against West Virginia, with the potential for Jones to get his second 10-win season in 4 years. The two teams put up video game numbers on offense. Thomas got the party started with a 5-yard run after Gundy connected with Dykes for a deep pass off of a flea flicker. A.B. Brown tied it back up, but Thomas got another touchdown to end the first quarter 14-7 to the good guys. Then, the Mountaineers scored 17 unanswered points in the second quarter, which included a Gundy interception that Darnell Warren ran back for a score. After halftime, Jones called Thomas's number 6 straight times, and he scored from 5 yards out. West Virginia answered with a field goal, but Gundy hit J.R. Dillard for a score to take the lead 28-27. Thomas followed that up with another score to take a 35-27 lead. The Mountaineers scored with 1:13 left on the clock, but Shane Mackey tackled Keith Wynn a yard short of the goal line on the 2-point conversion to earn a 35-33 win. Thurman Thomas finished his final season with 1,767 yards and 21 TDs, earning his third All-American nod and finishing in 7th for Heisman voting. Barry Sanders also made the All-American team as a returner after scoring 4 return touchdowns. The opportunistic defense was led by Rod Smith and Melvin Gilliam, who both picked off 5 passes each, though Smith returned 3 of his for touchdowns. The Bills picked Thurman Thomas in the second round of the draft. He fell largely because of concerns about his knee injury, but Thomas had a Hall of Fame NFL career, making 5 All-Pro and 5 Pro Bowl teams. He won the 1991 MVP and helped lead Buffalo to 4 straight Super Bowls. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2006. Some pundits might have been worried that losing a running back like Thomas would hurt Oklahoma State's chances in 1988, but that was quickly put to bed in Week 1 against Miami of Ohio. Just like 87, Sanders took the opening kickoff back for a 100-yard touchdown. The Cowboys band had introduced the Spirit Rider back in 1984, but ahead of the 88 season, Ellis and Mary Grace Hostmeyer donated a horse to the program, which was named Bullet. After each touchdown, Bullet would take to the field to hype up the fans with a post-TD sprint. From that first Sanders touchdown, it was clear that the first Bullet was going to get quite the workout this year. Sanders added 178 yards rushing and 2 scores. Gundy threw for 246 yards and 2 scores, becoming OSU's all-time leading passer. Dykes caught 8 passes for 175 yards to move into second place in the Big 8's all-time receiving list. The Pokes sprinted to a 52-20 win, though Gundy said after the game, "On a scale of 10, I think I probably played about a 7, so there was room for improvement." Sanders picked up where he left off against Texas A&M, taking off for a 58-yard touchdown run on the second play of the game, en route to a 157-yard and 2-touchdown game at Lewis Field. The Pokes were up 38-7 by halftime. Rod Smith made sure the Aggies wouldn't have a comeback attempt, picking off a Chris Osgood pass and taking it back 73 yards for a score. For the first time since 1942, the Pokes had scored 50 points in back-to-back games. They figured they might as well make it 3 straight against Tulsa, as Sanders rushed for a school record 304 yards and 5 TDs. The Hurricanes made it interesting by exploding for 35 points in the second half after Oklahoma State didn't let them get past midfield in the first, but it wasn't enough. The Pokes won 56-35. Sanders had 4 more scores against Colorado the next week, but the Pokes didn't quite break 50, winning just 41-21. The defense was giving up yards and points, but had a knack for getting the offense extra possessions, racking up 6 turnovers against the Buffs. That combination of explosive offense and ball-hawking defense earned the Pokes a top 10 ranking heading into an away game against 7th-ranked Nebraska. Oklahoma State put up points, 42 of them in fact. Gundy tossed 2 touchdowns. Dykes caught 7 passes for 125 yards to break the Big 8 record for career catches. And Sanders ran for 189 yards and 4 scores. However, Gundy threw 2 first-quarter interceptions, and Oklahoma State quickly found themselves in a 35-0 hole after 15 minutes of play. The Pokes tried to storm back, but Nebraska's offense did enough to earn a 63-42 win. Against Mizzou, Sanders ran for just 154 yards and 2 scores, a relatively pedestrian effort by his standards. Dykes caught 5 passes for 135 yards and 2 more touchdowns, giving Oklahoma State a relatively easy 49-21 win. Next up was the winless Kansas State Wildcats. You'd think it was a Cowboys blowout by the 45-27 final score, but K-State kept it surprisingly close, despite Sanders breaking his own rushing record with 320 yards. The Wildcats stole 2 possessions with surprise onside kicks, and both teams let it fly through the air. Wildcats QB Carl Straw threw for 270 yards, 1 TD, and 1 interception, while Gundy passed for 228 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 INTs. 127 of those yards and 1 of the touchdowns went to Dykes. That set up a matchup with 8th-ranked Oklahoma at Lewis Field. The Sooners rolled to a 24-14 lead at halftime, but Sanders ran for 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter to put the Pokes up 28-24. Sooners quarterback Charles Thompson led an 80-yard drive, capping it with an 18-yard touchdown run. The Pokes drove down the field, getting to the Sooners' 20. On 3rd and 2, Sanders ran for a yard, seemingly setting up a key 4th down play. But then, Cowboys fullback Garrett Limbrick was called for a personal foul. That turned a 4th and 1 into a 4th and 16. Still, Gundy threw a beautiful pass to Brent Parker in the back of the end zone, but the wideout dropped what could have been a game winner, letting OU walk out as Bedlam champs once again. The Pokes took out their anger with a 63-24 win over Kansas the next week, with Sanders running for 312 yards and 5 scores to become the 3rd player in NCAA history to top 2,000 yards. He broke the all-time record for all-purpose yards the next week against Iowa State, hitting 2,892 yards as the Pokes won 49-28. The Pokes traveled to Japan for the regular season finale against Texas Tech, so Sanders wasn't around to pick up the Heisman Trophy when he beat out USC quarterback Rodney Peete for the award. Hours after it was announced he won, he cruised to 257 yards, bringing his record-setting season total to 2,558 yards. Oh, and he also had 39 touchdowns, giving him 10 more than any other player in NCAA history to that point. As I said, Bullet was not hurting for exercise. The Red Raiders did keep it interesting, but the Pokes held on to win 45-42, setting up a Holiday Bowl matchup against 15th-ranked Wyoming. In another meetup between Cowpokes, Oklahoma State destroyed Wyoming 62-14 behind Sanders' 220 yards and 5 scores. On the season, the junior back had 2,628 yards and 37 touchdowns. For whatever reason, the NCAA doesn't count as bowl game stats. Gundy threw for 2,163 yards and 19 TDs, while Dykes racked up 74 catches for 1,278 yards and 14 touchdowns. Sanders and Dykes were both named All-Americans and became first-round draft picks. The Lions picked Sanders 3rd overall. He went on to make 10 All-Pro and Pro Bowl rosters. He's one of just 9 players to rush for more than 2,000 yards in an NFL season and won the MVP in 1997. He also retired early, hanging him up after 10 years and just 1,457 yards short of the all-time rushing record. For reference, he rushed for fewer yards than that in only 3 of his 10 seasons, so it's almost guaranteed he would have broken the record if he'd stayed healthy. Sanders was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004. The Patriots selected Dykes 16th overall. He had a solid rookie season with 49 catches for 795 yards and 5 TDs, but knee injuries caused him to retire after 2 seasons. Unfortunately, his story with the Pokes isn't quite over. Just a few days after the 1988 season ended, Oklahoma State and the NCAA announced that they had investigated the football program. It was found that more than 40 violations, including payments made to Hart Dykes during his recruitment, had been made by the program, largely by a former assistant. Oklahoma State just missed out on the death penalty that had dismantled SMU in 1987, but was hit with 4 years probation. That meant no bowl games for 3 years and no televised games for 2 seasons. Plus, Jones's staff was limited to 20 scholarships from 1989 to 1992. Even worse, Sanders was reportedly considering coming back for his senior season, but ultimately decided to jump to the NFL after the sanctions came down. So the Pokes didn't have Sanders, couldn't play in a bowl game, and wouldn't be on TV. They did have Gundy, and 2 guys who, while not as good as Sanders and Dykes, had some potential in running back Gerald Hudson and receiver Curtis Mayfield. Plus, Rod Smith was hoping to lead another ball-hawking defense under first-year DC Bill Miller. And then, the game started. Gundy was sacked 6 times in the season opener against Tulsa, and the Pokes lost 20-10. That marked the first time in his career that Pat Jones lost a home opener. Then, Ohio State quarterback Greg Frey turned on the juice in Ohio Stadium, throwing for 284 yards and 2 TDs in a 37-13 shellacking. Texas Tech's Jamie Gill came into Lewis Field and secured a 31-15 win after overcoming 2 interceptions to lead his team to 3 second-half TDs. The 0-3 Pokes then hosted the 1-3 Wyoming Cowboys, who they had met in the Holiday Bowl a year prior. The rematch ended similarly. Wyoming committed 6 turnovers. Gundy tossed 2 TDs to become the Big Eight's career leader in the category, and Gerald Hudson ran for 148 yards to secure a 27-7 win. Unfortunately, a trip to Norman was next, and while the overmatched Cowboys played the 16th-ranked Sooners relatively well, Mike Gaddis's 274 yards on the ground proved too much, and OU won 37-15. Against K-State in the next game, Oklahoma State found itself down by 3 late in the game. Gundy led a 91-yard drive, capping it off with a 15-yard TD throw to Brent Parker to win 17-13. Then, 4th-ranked Nebraska ran them right out of the stadium, 48-23, though it should be said that Gundy became the Big 8 leader in career total offense in the loss. The Pokes rolled off 2 tight wins over Missouri and Kansas to get their record to 4-5 ahead of a visit from 2nd-ranked Colorado. Oklahoma State put up a good fight to start the game, but that just woke the Buffs up. The Big 8 champs pulled away in the second half, winning 41-17. The Cowboys ended the season with a 31-21 loss to Iowa State. Kicker Kerry Blanchard, receiver Curtis Mayfield, and linebacker Sim Drain made the all-conference team. Gundy threw for 2,203 yards, 14 TDs, and 9 interceptions, while Gerald Hudson racked up 910 yards rushing, despite missing a few games to injury. It wasn't a great season, but it could have been worse. Plus, Hudson and Mayfield were coming back for another year, giving the Pokes faithful a bit of hope that they could survive Mike Gundy's graduation. Though, for what it's worth, he wasn't going far. In 1990, soon after graduating, Gundy joined the Oklahoma State staff as the wide receivers coach. Things started off well in 1990 as the Pokes knocked off Tulsa 10-3 in the opener. Then they traveled to the Swamp, and the lack of experience showed in the Gators' 50-7 demolition. Northern Iowa was up next. The Panthers tried to stick around, but 3 fourth-quarter turnovers doomed their chances, and Oklahoma State bettered its record to 2-1. The Cowboys looked like they might have a road win against TCU the next week, but a late fumble ended those thoughts, giving the Horned Frogs a 31-21 win. Number 7 OU was up next. The Sooners held off any upset bids, grabbing a 31-17 win. The Pokes then headed to K-State, where they almost got a road win against Bill Snyder's men, but quarterback Kenny Ford fumbled just before hitting pay dirt, letting the Wildcats hold on to a 23-17 victory. A 31-3 loss at Memorial Stadium to 4th-ranked Nebraska made it 4 straight losses. They got back in the winning column on homecoming against Missouri 48-28 before losing a close game to Kansas 31-30. That one stung as kicker Kerry Blanchard bounced what would have been the game winner off the upright. Then Oklahoma State dropped another, this time to 4th-ranked Colorado 41-22. The season finale against Iowa State saw the Pokes fight to a 25-17 win on the road, giving them a 4-7 record that could have been 7-4 had things gone in their favor in those close games against TCU, K-State, and Kansas. Gerald Hudson was the biggest bright spot with 1,642 yards and 10 scores to make the All-American roster. Kicker Corey Blanchard, safety Mike Clark, and defensive lineman Stacy Satterwhite joined him on the All-Big 8 team. Hudson and receiver Curtis Mayfield were picked late in the 91 draft, but neither played much of the next level. And now, do we really have to talk about 1991? Can I just mention Stacy Satterwhite and defensive end Jason Gilden made the All-Big 8 team and leave it at that? No? Okay, fine. Heading into the 91 season, Oklahoma State wasn't a top-end program, but they hadn't gone winless since 1920, when Possum Jim Pixley was in charge. They were respectable. They'd had a Heisman Trophy winner on the team a few years ago, and yet, in 91, they were terrible. It started with a 13-7 loss at Tulsa, and a 30-3 loss at home against Arizona State. TCU held on for a 24-21 win, putting the Pokes well behind the 8 ball before back-to-back games against ranked teams. Miami, who is now coached by Dennis Erickson, so at least Jimmy Johnson didn't have to dismantle his former team, took the Cowboys to the Orange Bowl-shaped woodshed 40-3. Then Nebraska scored 49 points at Lewis Field to add insult to injury. Missouri won 41-7 in Columbia the next week. Finally, the Pokes showed a bit of life, tying Iowa State 6-6 in Ames. Any goodwill was wiped away when Kansas won 31-0 on homecoming. Walk around? More like mope around. Oklahoma State lost its final 3 games, though it did keep it relatively close against 14th ranked Colorado and Kansas State. OU was a different story, as the Sooners won 21-6. By season's end, Pat Jones's men were 0-10-1, the worst finish in 70 years. Pat Jones hung around for 3 more seasons before taking a year break in 95 and heading to the NFL. We could talk about the time in 92, when Oklahoma State scheduled Indiana State and Baylor for the opener by accident, leaving the university with egg on its face. Or later in that season, when Jones didn't suspend QB Gary Porter after the signal caller was arrested for a DUI. But that whole stretch was just bad. Sure, Jones made Mike Gundy his offensive coordinator in 94, which was kind of a peek at the future, but nothing mattered. After his strong start as a head coach, Jones's tenure ended with a whimper, going 10-21-2 and winning just 2 Big 8 games during his final 3 seasons. Guys like Raphael Denson and David Thompson were solid, but the Pokes spent the early 90s reeling from the sanctions brought down by the NCAA. It wasn't as dramatic as SMU, but it might be just as sad. Thankfully, the bad times on the football field also coincided with the rise of a few great musicians out of Oklahoma State, giving the fans plenty of tunes to drown their sorrows in when they hit the strip after game day. Garth Brooks is, of course, the big one. He'd gone to Oklahoma State on a track scholarship in the early 80s and graduated in 1984. By the early 90s, he was one of the biggest acts in the world, and Oklahoma State still plays Friends in Low Places after the third quarter of home games. However, the genre most associated with Oklahoma State and Stillwater is red dirt music. The genre has its roots in 1979, when several bands flocked to an off-campus piece of land affectionately called the Farm for endless jam sessions and parties. They developed a unique sound that blends country, bluegrass, rock, and honky-tonk. By the early 90s, bands like The Great Divide and Cross Canadian Ragweed were starting to break out, though my personal favorite red dirt band, Jason Boland and the Stragglers, didn't form until 98. Either way, the football might have been bad in the early 90s, but the music kept the drinks flowing at Eskimo Joe's on Wheel Wednesday every week. The 90s also gave Oklahoma State its best tradition. No one knows exactly when it started, but one Saturday, a group of rowdy fans showed up early and snuck in orange paddles. They hammered those things against the stadium wall, instilling fear and confusion into opposing teams. What started as a fun laugh with friends grew into an organization known as the Paddle People. And while it's now recognized by the university, the group remains committed to its tradition. They're given front row seats and early access to the games by the university, but still camp out like the Paddle People of old to build hype and get themselves ready to strike fear into any quarterback unfortunate enough to visit Stillwater. In '95, Jones was out, and Oklahoma State decided to bring in longtime Colorado assistant Bob Simmons. Like Johnson and Jones, he'd primarily been a defensive coach during his assistant career, so he signed a guy named Les Miles to take Gundy's spot as his offensive coordinator. The hope was that Miles could help improve the team's blocking to open more holes for running back David Thompson and do just enough with QB Tony Jones, who had 14 picks to 8 TDs in '94, to turn him into a solid enough passer to win some games. It wasn't going to be easy. Oklahoma State opened the season against second-ranked Nebraska, who were also the defending champions. Thompson did have 128 yards rushing and a score, but the Pokes lost in a blowout 64-21. The next week, Oklahoma State held a 23-3 lead over Tulsa with 8:14 left on the clock. The Hurricanes successfully converted a 4th and 15 to score a touchdown and make it 23-10. Then, they recovered an onside kick and scored again a minute later. Oklahoma State was stopped short on 3rd and 1 on the next possession, giving Tulsa the ball back with 1:41 left on the clock. Tulsa QB Troy DeGar completed clutch pass after clutch pass to drive down the field and score the go-ahead touchdown with just 6 seconds on the clock, ripping out the Pokes' hearts in the process. The Cowboys managed a 35-7 win the next week, but it came against a D1 AA team, Southwest Missouri State. That set up a tough 3-game run. They went on the road to Wyoming, then on the road again to 12th-ranked Tennessee and star quarterback Peyton Manning. Oklahoma State had a week break after that before hosting 8th-ranked Kansas State. Wyoming blew the doors off 45-25. Manning threw for a comfortable 200 yards and 2 scores in a 31-0 win for the Vols. After a 91-yard scamper with 7:37 left on the clock, it looked like Oklahoma State would pull off an upset over the Wildcats to celebrate homecoming. Then, K-State QB Matt Miller went to work. The guy had been sacked 7 times that day, but held strong in the pocket to hit several big throws, including an 18-yard strike for the go-ahead touchdown. Oklahoma State went on the road to beat Missouri 30-26 before losing back-to-back games to Iowa State and Colorado. They were sitting at 2-7 and had a matchup looming with the Sooners. But these weren't the usual Sooners. OU was led by first-year coach Howard Schnellenberger and was only 5-3-1 on the season. So chances of an upset at Oklahoma Memorial were low, but not as low as usual. After all, it had been 19 years since Oklahoma State beat OU, and that included seasons with all-time greats Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders. What in the world could David Thompson and Tony Jones hope to do? Well, it turns out they didn't have to do much. The Cowboys' defense played its best game of the season. They made 2 goal line stands to keep the Sooners out of the end zone. And freshman defensive back R.W. McQuarters picked off a pass midway through the 4th quarter to set up the Cowboys' final score. At the end of the day, Oklahoma State shut out its Bedlam rivals 12-0. The loss to 15th-ranked Kansas the next week didn't mean much, nor did the 24-20 win over Hawaii. Simmons only went 4-8 during his first season at the helm, but he beat the Sooners, and sometimes that's all that matters. In '96, the Cowboys had Tony Jones and David Thompson back. Thompson was coming off of a 1,500-yard, 13 TD season, so hopes were high that he'd become the next great Oklahoma State running back. They just needed Jones to continue to be solid and not turn the ball over. Defensive back R.W. McQuarters had flashed talent as a returner and in the secondary, giving the Pokes a dynamic new dimension to exploit. Plus, junior tight end Alonzo Mays was quickly becoming one of the best pass-catching TEs in the conference. Speaking of the conference, 1996 was the first year of the Big 12. Baylor, Texas, Texas A&M, and Texas Tech agreed to join the old Big 8 in '94, but '96 was the first year the teams moved over from the old Southwest Conference. Worryingly, the Pokes needed overtime to take down Southwest Missouri State to start the season. Even worse, Tony Jones picked up an injury, so redshirt freshman Chris Chalupka, apologies for a mispronunciation there, I couldn't find a good source for him, started the Big 12 opener against Texas Tech. It didn't go well. The Cowboys lost 31-13, and Chalupka was replaced by Joe Fears late in the game for poor play. Thompson ran for 252 yards the next week, to lead OSU over Tulsa 30-9, and R.W. McQuarters had 2 interceptions to key a 31-17 win over Utah State. Then they went to DKR to play the 23rd ranked Texas Longhorns. It was, not good. The Longhorns totaled 624 yards of offense, en route to a 71-14 butt whooping. It was a bit better against 9th ranked Colorado the following week, but the end result was the same. Another loss for the Pokes. They did come back from a 17-point deficit to beat Iowa State on homecoming, but 3 straight losses to Missouri, Texas A&M, and OU guaranteed another losing season. Simmons' men scored a 37-17 win over Baylor to end the season, so the team bettered its record by 1. That's largely thanks to David Thompson having another 1,500-yard season to end his career on a high note. Heading into 97, the strength of the team was seemingly going to be on the defensive side of the ball, as the R.W. McQuarters and Kevin Williams DB tandem looked ready to shut down offenses through the air, while guys like defensive lineman Jamal Williams and linebacker Kenyatta Wright did the dirty work in the trenches. Leading that defense was Rob Ryan, the new DC. He is the son of legendary defensive coach Buddy Ryan and the twin of foot enthusiast Rex Ryan. Rob was coming to the team after stints with the Cardinals and Hutchinson Community College. And of course, tight end Alonzo Mays was coming back for his senior season, giving freshman quarterback Tony Lindsay the perfect safety valve. The 97 season started well. Sophomore running back and Coach Simmons' son Nathan ran for 2 scores and 85 yards, while freshman Jamal Fobbs added 85 more on the ground to secure a 21-14 win over Iowa State. Fobbs exploded for 217 yards against the Ragin' Cajuns in a 31-7 rout. The Pokes were still trying to figure out their quarterback situation against Fresno State and Louisiana Monroe, but that doesn't mean Lindsay and Chris Chalupka were downright terrible. The duo combined for 5 TD passes, 2 to Alonzo Mays against the Bulldogs alone. Even against Ricky Williams and the Texas Longhorns, both guys played, but Lindsay showed off his dynamic ability, rushing for 126 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 42-16 victory to move the Cowboys to 5-0 and a top 20 ranking. Though I have to give the defense a ton of credit for that game. They held Williams to his 2nd lowest rushing total of the year, and they did it a week after Williams rumbled for 250 yards and 5 scores against Rice. Just an incredible job by the Pokes D. A homecoming matchup against 24th ranked Colorado was up next. Oklahoma State needed all 4 of Tim Snide's field goals to stay in the game. DB Kevin Williams took a pick back to the house to take the Cowboys into halftime with a 19-14 lead. The 2 teams traded rushing TDs before Buffs QB John Hessler hit Dwayne Sherrington on a 73-yard bomb to put Colorado up 29-26 late in the game. Tony Lindsay stormed down the field, capping the drive with a 19-yard pass to Alonzo Mays to give Oklahoma State a 33-29 win and send the fans home happy. At 6-0, the Cowboys' next game was against Missouri. R.W. McQuarters got the festivities started with a 56-yard rushing touchdown. Then, the Tigers poured it on. Oklahoma State tossed 3 interceptions, and Missouri went into halftime with a 24-7 lead. The game was far from over, though. After Tigers QB Corby Jones scored his 4th TD, Nathan Simmons finally got Oklahoma State back into it with a 2-yard run. Tony Lindsay threw for 3 unanswered touchdowns, 2 of them going to his favorite tight end, Alonzo Mays, giving Oklahoma State a 37-30 lead late in the 4th. But Corby Jones hit Ricky Ross for a 38-yard touchdown to send the game into overtime. Lindsay hit Fobbs for a 21-yard TD pass to start OT with a score, but Brock Olivo ran it in from 1 yard out to send it into double OT. Corby Jones ran for yet another TD, his 6th of the game, to give Mizzou the lead. Tony Lindsay ran for a score himself, and Coach Simmons decided to go for a win. Unfortunately, the Pokes got stuffed on the 2-point conversion, giving the Tigers a 51-50 win in a thriller. The next week, in the 4th quarter against Texas A&M, the Cowboys looked to have things sewn up 22-7. Then, the Aggies stormed back to tie it up and send Oklahoma State into overtime for the 2nd game in a row. Unfortunately, Tim Snide's 39-yard field goal wasn't enough as the Aggies scored on a 6-yard run from DeAndre Hardman to win 28-25. In a strange role reversal, I can confidently say this sentence. Thankfully, OU is up next. In 97, the Sooners were 3-7 and coming off of a 69-7 beatdown at the hands of Nebraska heading into Bedlam. Sure, they put the first points on the board with a Brandon Daniels run, but OU had 6 turnovers in the 30-7 loss, making things relatively easy for Oklahoma State. Texas Tech flipped that script, forcing 3 Cowboys turnovers en route to a 27-3 win. Oklahoma State righted the ship with a comfortable 24-14 win at Baylor that only looks that close because the Bears scored a garbage time TD with 6 seconds left on the clock and the game well out of reach. That set up an Alamo Bowl matchup against 17th ranked Purdue. The final score was 33-20 Boilermakers, but this was more of a defensive battle as the two teams combined for 7 turnovers. And for what it's worth, the two teams met on the wrestling match around the same time, and Oklahoma State walked away with a dominating 27-6 win, so who really won that season's matchup, Purdue? Despite the bowl loss, it was a successful 8-4 season for the Pokes, but they were also losing a ton of talent. R.W. McQuarters, Kevin Williams, and Alonzo Mays, all 3 All-Big 12 players in 97, with the latter 2 also making the All-American team, were off to the NFL. The 49ers picked McQuarters 28th overall, banking on his supreme athleticism. While never a star, he carved out a long career as a returner and defensive back, winning a Super Bowl in 2007 with the Giants. The Steelers picked Williams in the 3rd round and quickly traded him to the Jets. He never quite panned out, playing just 5 seasons in the NFL. Meanwhile, the Bears picked Mays in the 4th round. Like Williams, he played for a few years, scoring 1 touchdown during his career. The Pokes also lost Les Miles to the Dallas Cowboys, bringing in former Arkansas QB Ron Calcagney as the new OC. That said, Oklahoma State still had Tony Lindsay, Nathan Simmons, and Jamal Fobbs on offense, giving them plenty of weapons. After all, Lindsay was the Big 12 Freshman of the Year during his first season. Plus, linebacker Kenyatta Wright was back for another season after making the All-Big 12 team in 97. The team started the year with a 38-28 win over Kansas, largely on the legs of quarterback Tony Lindsay. Then, Tulsa punched them in the mouth early at Skelly Field, building a 35-0 lead before Oklahoma State made it slightly interesting with 3 second-half touchdowns to finish the game 35-20. The Pokes scored an upset over 25th-ranked Mississippi State next, winning 42-23 as the defense grabbed 3 interceptions and the Pokes ran for 360 yards and 6 TDs between Lindsay, Simmons, and Fobbs. The Pokes then played 3 undefeated teams in a row: Nebraska, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. Outside of 3rd-ranked K-State, they were never run out of the stadium, but did lose all 3 games, setting up a matchup against 2-5 Oklahoma. The Sooners started the scoring early, putting up 10 first-quarter points. Tony Lindsay threw a touchdown to Brian Akins to close the gap before an OU field goal gave the Sooners a 13-7 lead going into halftime. Lindsay hit sophomore tight end Marcellus Rivers for a 20-yard score early in the 3rd, but OU answered 4 minutes later. Then, Oklahoma State rolled off 14 unanswered points to give them a 28-19 lead going into the 4th. Jack Sills hit Jason Freeman on a 52-yard pass to bring OU back into striking distance, but Tony Lindsay scored twice more, and the defense, which forced 4 turnovers, continued to play well, securing the Pokes a 41-26 Bedlam victory. Oklahoma State dropped a boring 17-6 game to 8th-ranked Texas A&M, and things looked bleak against 20th-ranked Texas. The Longhorns ran out to a 21-7 lead in the first quarter, but the Pokes hit a few field goals, and Tony Lindsay ran it in midway through the second to tie the game up. Then, Major Applewhite hit Ricky Williams for a 48-yard score, and Chris Stockton nailed a 39-yard field goal to put the Longhorns up 31-21 heading into the half. Lindsay's 2-yard TD run was the only score of the 3rd, and after a Texas field goal, Lindsay hit Ethan Howell for a 55-yard score to tie things up 34-34. Unfortunately, Stockton hit a walk-off field goal as time expired to give the Longhorns a win. Oklahoma State finished the season with easy wins over the Ragin' Cajuns and Baylor to finish the season 5-6. While not the Cowboys' best season, that did make back-to-back wins over OU and Bedlam, so nobody could be too mad at Simmons. Unfortunately, the Sooners fired John Blake and brought in Bob Stoops as the next head coach. He hired Mike Leach to run the air raid and, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. In '99, Oklahoma State won its first 2 games against the Ragin' Cajuns in Tulsa, but suffered for it. Tony Lindsay hurt his knee, forcing him to miss 5 games. BJ Tiger played well as his backup, but it was the running back tandem of Nathan Simmons and Jamal Fobbs who led the team to victory. In the 46-9 win over Tulsa, the team used the running back duo, a Kenyatta Wright fumble return touchdown, and 2 Marcellus Rivers TD grabs to overcome 3 turnovers for an easy win. However, the loss of Lindsay showed in the next game against Mississippi State. In a game that included 12 total turnovers, 6 by each team, the Bulldogs did enough to win 29-11. The offense continued to sputter against Nebraska, but Tiger had a solid game against Texas Tech, throwing for 203 yards and 2 scores while adding 61 yards rushing and a TD to lead the team to a 41-21 win. That said, the game happening at Lewis Field that night was a sideshow to other events. For whatever reason, Oklahoma had an influx of crickets that year. Experts say it might have been a downturn in diseases that regulated the insects' numbers, but when the lights flicked on in Stillwater that night, literally millions of crickets descended on the stadium. Fans and players thought a plague must have hit them, as the crickets got into every crevice and drink cup in the stadium. Most players didn't even take their helmets off that night to keep the insects out of their face. This was actually the first Oklahoma State game I attended in person, and it was a horrifying sight for an 11-year-old and something that stuck with me and everyone else at the stadium to this day. I vividly remember going to the gas station after the game and having to fight to keep the crickets out of the car. When I tell you they were everywhere, I really mean it, and I can only imagine how terrible cleaning up millions of cricket carcasses the next day must have been. Cricket apocalypse aside, Lindsay was back for the game against Kansas State, but was obviously rusty, throwing 3 picks to give the 7th-ranked Wildcats a 44-21 win. He also hurt his shoulder in the game, so Tiger was back in the starting lineup against 22nd-ranked Texas A&M, a 21-3 loss for the Pokes. Lindsay was back for the Texas game, but didn't play well in the 34-21 loss that really wasn't even that close, as Tiger hit Rivers for a garbage time TD to pretty the score. Lindsay finally looked like his old self as a passer against Kansas, throwing for 2 TDs. His dynamic rushing ability still wasn't there, but Oklahoma State scored on a block punt, a fumble return, and trick wide receiver pass to win 45-13. The next week was a comfortable 34-14 win over Baylor, which looks closer than it was, as Oklahoma State built up a 34-0 lead late in the 3rd before letting off the gas. That set up the season final against OU. The Sooners were riding quarterback Josh Heupel, who had proven to be the best passer in the Big 12 under Stoops and Leach. That year, he threw for 3,460 yards and 30 touchdowns. Against the Cowboys, he had an average showing, but Lindsay was terrible, throwing 3 interceptions. The Pokes' only score came on a Terrell Knowles interception return in the 2nd. Other than that, it was all Sooners, who walked out of Oklahoma Memorial with a 44-7 win, destroying any hopes of an Oklahoma State Bedlam three-peat. Lindsay and Marcellus Rivers were back for the 2000 season. They had a few exciting up-and-coming players in redshirt freshman receiver Rashawn Woods, redshirt freshman quarterback Aso Pogai, and true freshman running back Tatum Bell. During a preseason scrimmage, Lindsay hurt his shoulder. He still took the field in week 1, throwing for 3 TDs, while junior running back Reggie White ran for 187 yards and a score to beat Tulsa 36-26. Both guys were again solid the next week against Texas State in a 23-0 win, but it was clear Lindsay was ailing. Lindsay played about half of the next game against 22nd-ranked Southern Miss before Aso Pogai took over, but neither player was effective, tossing 3 picks between them to doom Oklahoma State to a 28-6 loss. It was even worse the next week against Texas. The Longhorns easily won 42-7 behind 3 touchdown passes from Major Applewhite. Lindsey trotted out one more time against Missouri, throwing 2 picks before Pogai replaced him, and the Cowboys lost 24-10. Soon after the game, doctors diagnosed Lindsey with a torn shoulder and ruled him out for the season, ending his college career on a downer. With that, Pogai was the starter, and Simmons hoped to salvage a season while developing the future quarterback. And, to be fair to Pogai, he did keep things interesting in the Cowboys' next few games. He threw for 2 touchdowns and ran for a third to tie Iowa State at 26 with 3 minutes left. Then, Sage Rosenfels led the Cyclones down the field to win it with a 33-yard pass to Lane Danielson. After Colorado jumped out to a 21-0 lead the next week, Pogai tossed 2 touchdowns to Jamal Fobbs and Kerry Jackson, with Reggie White adding a rushing score to bring the Pokes within 9 early in the 4th. Unfortunately, Colorado scored a few minutes later to seal a 37-21 win. And Oklahoma State was down by just 5 in the 4th quarter against Texas A&M after Gabe Lindsey ran a punt back 57 yards for a score. Pogai and the Pokes had the ball with a chance to win it late. He tossed a great ball up to Marcellus Rivers in the back of the end zone, but officials ruled him out. The Cowboys made a case for pass interference, drawing personal fouls for voicing their displeasure, and A&M walked away with a 21-16 win on the back of Jamar Toombs. 2 days after the game, Simmons announced he would resign at the end of the year. A few days later, Texas Tech blew the doors off Oklahoma State 58-0, and a 50-22 win over Baylor didn't move the needle too much for the fanbase. If the team wanted to go out on a positive note, they needed to beat number 1 ranked OU in the season finale at Lewis Field. The Sooners struck first with a 3-yard touchdown pass from Josh Heupel to Curtis Fagan. Kicker Tim Duncan added a field goal soon after to put OU up 10-0. Then, the Sooner defense picked up a safety just before halftime. However, Heisman hopeful Heupel could not move the ball on the Cowboys after that first drive. He threw 2 picks and only mustered 154 yards. Granted, Pogai wasn't much better, but the Pokes were firmly in this. In the 3rd quarter, Tatum Bell put his foot in the ground and made a nasty cut to get free for a 60-yard touchdown, making it a 12-7 game. Duncan missed a 45-yard field goal in the 4th, and Gabe Lindsey ran back a punt 2 drives later to set up Oklahoma State for a chance to win. Pogai drove down the field to the OU 10. A few plays later, the Sooners had pushed them back 2 yards, making it 4th and goal from the 12-yard line. Pogai threw a fade to Marcellus Rivers in the end zone, but it landed just short, saving the Sooners from the upset. OU went on to win the national title over Florida State that season. As mentioned, Simmons left the team after the OU game. Fortunately, whoever would take over wasn't coming in with an empty cupboard. Also Pogai, Rashawn Woods, and Tatum Bell were all coming back, giving the next guy plenty of firepower. The Oklahoma State admin didn't have to look far for its next coach. They decided to bring in a man who knew the program well from his days as an offensive coordinator under Bob Simmons. Les Miles was the pick, and he brought in another familiar name to lead his offense, naming Mike Gundy his offensive coordinator. In the season opener against Southern Missouri, Pogai put up big yardage numbers, throwing for 294 yards, with 139 of them going to Rashawn Woods. But the running game struggled, and the Pokes couldn't get in the end zone. 3 Luke Phillips field goals weren't enough, and Oklahoma State lost the opener 17-19. The roles reversed against Louisiana Tech. Pogai struggled through the air, but Bell ran for 109 yards and a score, and the defense ruined Luke McCown's day, forcing him into 3 picks. Still, the 2 teams were deadlocked with 6 minutes to go. Then, defensive lineman Kevin Williams sacked McCown for a 15-yard loss, setting up a punt deep in La Tech territory. The Bulldogs punter fumbled the snap, and Cowboys DB Robbie Gillum recovered the ball in the end zone to win the game. "How lucky am I," he said after the game. "How lucky indeed, Robbie." A few days later, the nation as a whole was rocked by the 9/11 tragedy. Oklahoma State and Northern Arizona agreed to skip their September 15th matchup, so the Pokes' next game was against Texas A&M at Kyle Field. Pogai once again struggled, though neither offense was particularly sharp. Still, A&M got the 21-7 victory in front of a record-setting crowd. After a comfortable 24-0 win over Northwestern State, the Pokes went up against Missouri in a thriller. Tatum Bell opened the scoring with a 1-yard run in the first, and Rashawn Woods followed it up with a 17-yard pass from Pogai to stretch the Cowboys' lead to 14-0. 2 Mizzou field goals kept the Tigers in it. Missouri came out of the half hot, putting up 22 points, including 2 successful 2-point conversions, to give them a 28-14 lead heading into the fourth. Pogai led 2 touchdown drives, sending the game to overtime with a 21-yard pass to Woods. The QB then ran in another score to start overtime, but Mizzou answered. The teams traded field goals in the second OT, but the Cowboys could not answer the Tigers' field goal in the third overtime, losing 41-38. Next week was a matchup against 11th-ranked Texas. Things started well, with a touchdown pass to Rashawn Woods and a Luke Phillips field goal, giving the Pokes a 10-0 lead. Texas then scored 45 unanswered points. Chris Sims threw for 5 touchdowns, and Cedric Benson ran for 131 yards. Chris Massey's 97-yard kickoff return to make it 45-17 in the fourth was fun, but the Pokes never had a chance. Oklahoma State dropped its next 3 games, but gave each team a fight. Seneca Wallace and the Iowa State Cyclones pulled off a 14-point win despite a late comeback attempt for the Cowboys. Colorado was down 19-7 late in the third, thanks to a Tatum Bell touchdown, Dwayne Level's INT return, and a safety forced by the Oklahoma State defense. However, Marcus Houston scored to end the third, and Daniel Graham hauled in a touchdown pass midway through the fourth to give the Buffs a comeback win. Pogai locked into something of a quarterback duel against Cliff Kingsbury in the Texas Tech matchup. Pogai threw for 245 yards and 3 scores, but Kingsbury's 440 yards and 4 TDs won the day 49-30. Heading into the matchup against Baylor, Pogai was nursing a knee injury, so Josh Fields, a 2-sport athlete for Oklahoma State in football and baseball, took over. He threw for 2 touchdowns in the 38-22 win. But the real star was defensive back Darrent Williams, who returned 2 interceptions for touchdowns. That set up a matchup with the defending champion and 4th-ranked Sooners. Over 75,000 OU fans greeted the Pokes at Oklahoma Memorial on November 24th. Most likely assumed that the 3-7 Cowboys had no chance against Nate Hibble, Quentin Griffin, and the rest of the Sooners. And to their credit, OU struck first. Griffin finished a second-quarter drive with an 8-yard run. The 2 teams traded field goals, but the Sooners left just enough time on the clock for Luke Phillips to hit another field goal just before halftime to make the score 10-6 OU. Neither team scored in the third, as both defenses forced bad decisions. By game's end, there were 7 total turnovers, 6 of them coming on interceptions. The Cowboys added 7 sacks, including a few big ones from Kevin Williams and Marcus Jones, the latter of which also had 2 picks. The Bedlam rivals traded field goals, and Oklahoma State had the ball with the game on the line. Josh Fields delivered a few key throws to get the Pokes to OU's 48. On 3rd and 7, Fields found T.D. Bryant for a 31-yard completion, moving Oklahoma State to OU's 14. It was eerily similar to Bedlam in 2000. Just like Pogai, Fields threw a fade to his favorite target, in this case, Rashawn Woods, in the back of the end zone. But this time, Woods caught the ball and dragged his toes, securing a 16-13 win for the Pokes and ending OU's title hopes. Les Miles was only 4-7 in his first year, but he beat OU. He was also returning most of his starters, including the Big 12 leader in receiving yards and touchdowns Rashawn Woods, who had 80 catches for 1,023 yards and 10 scores in 2001. The Pokes got off to an inauspicious start to the 2002 season, losing a 39-36 shootout against Louisiana Tech, despite Josh Fields hitting Woods for 3 TDs. The Pokes were missing Tatum Bell, which could have been an excuse, but backup Vernon Morency ran for 108 yards, including a 75-yard TD, so even that doesn't hold water. They got back to 500 with a 45-10 win over Northern Iowa, as Woods put up nearly 200 yards receiving. But Fields threw 3 picks against UCLA the next week en route to a 38-24 loss. Also, Pogai replaced him late in the game, but he tossed another INT, giving the Pokes 4 on the day. Fields got back on track against SMU, while third-string running back Seymour Shaw added 91 yards rushing and 3 scores in the 52-16 win. Shaw had another solid game against Texas, but it wasn't enough to overcome Cedric Benson's 117 yards, and the Pokes fell 17-15 to number 2 ranked Texas. The Pokes did have a shot at the end, but cornerback Rod Babers picked off Fields to seal the victory. After the upset bid fell short, the Cowboys again struggled with turnovers against 19th ranked Kansas State. Fields and Pogai threw 2 interceptions each, and Oklahoma State fell 44-9, despite having Tatum Bell in the lineup and forcing 4 turnovers of their own. Bell announced his full return against Nebraska, running for 182 yards, as Rashawn Woods added 134 and a score as a pass catcher to hold on for a 24-21 win. Bell ran for 143 yards and 3 scores the next week against A&M, and the defense used 2 interceptions to squeak out a 28-23 victory. Cliff Kingsbury did rip the Cowboys to shreds in the next game, giving Texas Tech a 49-24 win, but Oklahoma State pulled off back-to-back wins over Kansas and Baylor to set up a season finale against third-ranked OU. The Sooners came into Lewis Field once again, hoping to play for a national title. They had a top 10 defense and a solid offense, but it was not enough. Fields threw for 357 yards and 4 touchdowns. Bell ran for 106 yards on 22 carries. And Woods caught 12 passes for 226 yards and 3 scores. After the game, Bell said, "They couldn't stop our passing game, really couldn't stop our running game. I knew, no question, they was going to bring their A game. So hey, we take what they give us, and we made plays." If the Norman fans called the 2001 victory a fluke, they had no answers for this 38-28 offensive slugfest. The Pokes soundly beat the Sooners. Woods exclaimed after the game, "It's obvious, we are on the rise." They followed that emotional win with a relatively easy 33-23 Houston Bowl win over Southern Miss. Rashawn Woods was named an All-American with 107 catches for 1,695 yards and 17 touchdowns. Bell and defensive lineman Kevin Williams were named to the All-Big 12 team. Bell was especially impressive, rushing for 1,096 yards and 11 scores, despite missing a few games. Fields threw for 3,145 yards and 31 TDs to just 10 interceptions, and all 3 offensive stars were coming back for the 2003 season. However, Williams was off to the NFL. The Vikings picked him 9th overall, and he went on to make 5 All-Pro and 6 Pro Bowl teams. In 2021, he was inducted into the Vikings Ring of Honor. Also, Pogai was also out. He decided to transfer to the University of Central Oklahoma. He knew Fields had won the starting job and wanted a chance to play during his senior season. Heading into the 03 season, expectations were high. The Pokes returned most of their offensive firepower, and Rashawn Woods' younger brother DeJuan was ready to join him as a starting wide receiver. And with guys like Darrent Williams and Greg Richmond in the defensive backfield, the Cowboys' ball-hawking defense seemed ready to roll. They again lost the season opener, dropping this one to Nebraska 17-7 as a rusty Fields threw 3 interceptions. Then, Oklahoma State rattled off 4 straight wins, all by multiple touchdowns, beating Wyoming 48-24, Southwest Missouri State 42-3, SMU 52-6, and Louisiana Lafayette 56-3. It was a different guy dominating every week. One game, Bell would run for 200 yards and a few scores. The next, Fields would toss 7 TDs. Then, they might have Darrent Williams run 2 punts back for scores. It was total domination from the Cowboys. The Wyoming game was particularly important, as Lewis Field was officially renamed to Boone Pickens Stadium in honor of Oklahoma State alumnus T. Boone Pickens, who had donated $165 million to the institution to help build the athletic village. That year, a major expansion started to build the West End Zone Stadium, which added a brick exterior to match the rest of the campus's architecture and connect the stadium to Gallagher-Iba Arena. After that easy stretch, the Pokes faced 22nd-ranked K-State. Tatum Bell ran for 143 yards and 2 scores, but Darren Sproles kept things close with his all-around game. Still, the Pokes held a 38-21 lead early in the 4th thanks to 3 Eli Roberson interceptions. However, the Wildcat signal caller came alive late, scoring twice in the last 8 minutes to get back into the game. But the Pokes held tough, winning 38-34. Had another tough test against B.J. Simmons and Texas Tech in the next game. Oklahoma State opened with 2 rushing touchdowns, one from Tatum Bell and another from Tommy Devereux. Then, Simmons hit Wes Welker for a score to end the first quarter. The Pokes went on a scoring spree in the second. Fields tossed a touchdown to Charlie Johnson. Tatum Bell ripped off a 95-yard run for a score, and Luke Phillips kicked 2 field goals, putting the Cowboys up 34-14 at halftime, following a second touchdown from Tech's signal caller. Bell scored again to open the second half, giving him 3 scores on the game. Then, after another Simmons touchdown pass, Seymour Shaw rumbled for a 53-yard score to put the Pokes up 48-21. Then, Simmons put on a run, leading the Red Raiders to 21 unanswered points to get the score to 48-42. Phillips hit another field goal, but Welker scored a second touchdown to make it 51-49 with 4 minutes left. The Raiders got the ball back, but Cowboys safety John Holland grabbed an interception with 1:04 left on the clock to seal the victory. After an easy win over Texas A&M, the Pokes had to go to Gaylord Memorial to face the number 1 ranked OU Sooners. Some Cowboys fans might have thought Les Miles had Bob Stoops' number, but Jason White and the Sooners dominated from the jump, winning 52-9. Darrent Williams was the lone bright spot, returning a pick for the Cowboys' only score. It was more of the same at Texas. Vince Young and Cedric Benson combined for nearly 300 yards rushing, and Will Matthews had 3 touchdowns on just 4 carries en route to a 55-16 win for the Longhorns. The Cowboys ended the season with comfortable wins against Kansas and Baylor to set up a Cotton Bowl matchup against Eli Manning and the Ole Miss Rebels. Oklahoma State built a 14-7 lead early in the game thanks to touchdown runs from Vernon Morency and Tatum Bell. However, Eli Manning led Ole Miss to 24 unanswered points, giving the Rebels a 31-14 lead early in the fourth. Another Morency TD put the Pokes within 10. Oklahoma State got the ball back, and Fields hit Woods for a touchdown with more than 4 minutes on the clock. Unfortunately, they ran out of time to complete the comeback, losing 31-28 to the lesser Manning. It was a great season for Les Miles' team, but 2004 was gonna be tough. Fields was on his way to an MLB career. Woods, who had put up 77 catches for 1,367 yards and 15 TDs to make the All-American team, was going to the NFL. The 49ers picked him 31st overall, but he was limited by injuries and out of the NFL after a season. Meanwhile, Tatum Bell was also taking his 1,286 yards and 16 scores to the pros. The Broncos picked him in the second round, and the back carved out a solid NFL career, totaling 2,773 yards and 16 total touchdowns over 5 seasons. I should also mention defensive end Antonio Smith. Despite being a low draft pick, he made the Pro Bowl in 2011 after putting up 6.5 sacks for the Texans, and won a Super Bowl with the Broncos in 2015. What Les Miles did have was Vernon Morency at running back. DeJuan Woods was hoping to follow in his brother's footsteps at wide receiver, and the youngest Woods brother Donovan was set to take over at quarterback. Plus, Darrent Williams was coming back to anchor the secondary. He'd just had a season that saw him pick off 6 passes, so if nothing else, the Pokes had a ball hawk at the back of their defense. In the opener against UCLA, Donovan Woods threw for just 23 yards, but Morency ran for 261 and 2 scores. The defense forced 4 turnovers, including 2 Drew Olson interceptions, to give the Pokes a 31-20 win. Oklahoma State kept winning, mostly on Morency's legs, as Woods continued to struggle as a passer. Morency ran for 184 yards and a score in a 38-21 win over Tulsa. He reeled off 116 yards and another score against SMU. Woods did throw for 2 scores in that game, both to his brother DeJuan, but passed for fewer than 100 yards. The Cowboys forced 5 turnovers that game to decimate the Mustangs 59-7. Morency ran for 143 yards and 2 scores in a 36-7 win over Iowa State, and I should note Woods threw another touchdown to his older brother in the win. Then, Woods had his best game so far against Colorado, tossing for 193 yards and 3 scores, with Morency rushing for 167 yards and 2 scores in the 42-14 beatdown. Oklahoma State went into a homecoming matchup with Texas A&M undefeated and holding the 15 spot in the polls. A few early turnovers and an offensive explosion from the Aggies saw the Pokes down 27-6 at halftime. While they put together a few good drives in the second half, it wasn't nearly enough. The Pokes' perfect season ended with a 36-20 loss. Mizzou used a fast start and 2 Oklahoma State turnovers to race out to a 17-0 lead with less than a minute remaining in the first half. Then, Donovan Woods hit his brother for a 12-yard TD just before halftime to trim the lead. Jason Ricks's field goal for the Cowboys were the only points scored in the third quarter. The Pokes kept pushing, mostly behind Morency's 173 yards rushing, but it was Woods who pulled Oklahoma State level on a 34-yard scamper. The Cowboys got the ball back, and Ricks hit another field goal to put Oklahoma State up 20-17 with less than a minute on the clock. Oklahoma State's defense held on to preserve the win. That set up back-to-back games against second-ranked OU and 9th-ranked Texas. The OU game at Boone Pickens took place the day before Halloween, and things quickly got spooky. It was the 99th Bedlam meeting, and the Sooners got the party started with a 4-yard pass from Jason White to Mark Bradley. The Cowboys recovered a muffed punt in the second, and Donovan Woods made the Sooners pay a few plays later with a 3-yard run. About a minute after that, Oklahoma State DB Grant Jones recovered another bobbled punt in the end zone to put the Cowboys up 14-7. Oklahoma answered with 2 touchdown strikes to Mark Bradley, giving him 3 touchdown catches in the first half. After the half, Mark Clayton returned an Oklahoma State punt 50 yards for a score to stretch the lead to 28-14. Donovan Woods kept the Pokes in it with a 39-yard touchdown to Prentice Elliott. Seconds later, the Sooners star running back Adrian Peterson, who racked up 249 yards in the game, exploded for an 80-yard touchdown run, making it 35-21 OU. Vernon Morency answered back a few minutes later to get the Cowboys within 7. An OU field goal brought the lead back to 10, but Morency scored again, and there were 10 minutes left on the clock. The Cowboys got the ball back and drove down the field to set up a 49-yard field goal attempt from freshman Jason Ricks to send the game to overtime. Sadly, he pushed it wide left, leaving OU's undefeated season intact. Despite the loss, Oklahoma State moved up in the rankings. That didn't last long, as the Texas Longhorns defended DKR 56-35, thanks to 5 touchdowns from Cedric Benson. Though that does not tell the full story. With 90 seconds left in the first half, Oklahoma State held a 35-7 lead. Then Benson got loose, and the Longhorns' defense clamped down. Texas rolled to 49 unanswered points to earn a massive comeback victory. Morency missed the next game against Baylor, but the Pokes waltzed to a 49-21 win. Woods threw a few deep TDs, and Prentice Elliott returned a punt 74 yards for a score. However, Woods struggled to keep up with Sonny Cumbie and Texas Tech, throwing for 60 yards to Cumbie's 281, and the return of Morency wasn't enough to overcome the Red Raiders. Oklahoma State fell to 7-1 with the 35-15 loss. That put them into an Alamo Bowl matchup with 22nd ranked Ohio State. Ted Ginn Jr. and the rest of the Buckeyes thoroughly dominated the Pokes, winning 33-7, and even that score makes it look better than it was, as Oklahoma State didn't score until the fourth quarter when the game was well out of reach. 5 days after the loss, Les Miles pulled a Jimmy Johnson. Nick Saban had just left the LSU Tigers to coach the Miami Dolphins, and Miles saw a chance to jump to a program that was 1 year removed from a national title. Like Johnson, it's tough to blame the guy for leaving, but it definitely stung at the time. Miles was only at Oklahoma State for 4 seasons, but he'd beaten the Sooners twice and introduced fan-favorite traditions like the walk and the post-game alma mater. Thankfully, he was leaving the program in good hands, as Mike Gundy, the former Oklahoma State quarterback, was taking over as the head coach. No one knew if he'd have as much success as Miles, but with Boone Pickens' investment into athletics starting to take shape, hope was high that Gundy could help the program reach new heights.